All right, today we're diving deep into the case of one of America's most infamous serial killers, John Wayne Gacy. We're going to piece together the story of the man behind the monster using court records, FBI files, and some incredible investigative journalism.
So, let's start here, not at the beginning of a life, but at the very end of one. These were pretty much the last words 15-year-old Robert Piest ever said to his mom before he walked out of his pharmacy job.
And just like that, he was gone. But this one disappearance, after so many others had gone completely unnoticed, was the one that would finally pull the thread and unravel a whole decade of absolute horror. It would expose the predator that was hiding in plain sight.
So what was so different this time? Well, it came down to this. Robert's family was relentless. They immediately got the police involved, and because of that pressure, John Gacy was a person of interest in less than 48 hours. And this time, the cops just weren't going to let it go.
You know, to really get how Gacy got away with it for so long, we have to look at the incredibly careful public image he built for himself. It was a mask, right? A mask designed to hide the monster lurking just beneath the surface.
Gacy presented this perfect face to the world, almost too good to be true, really. But behind that friendly community guy facade was a deeply, deeply disturbed and violent person with a criminal history that went way back. I mean, just look at this. The contrast is just wild. On one hand, you've got the successful businessman, the political organizer. And on the other, a convicted felon whose psychiatrists had already warned was a serious risk to reoffend. He was literally living two completely different lives inside one body. And see, he didn't just blend in. He made himself a pillar of the community. This was the guy mowing lawns for the elderly, fixing gutters for free. He was so involved as a local Democratic precinct captain that he even got a photo op with the First Lady, Rosalind Carter. He dug himself in so deep that the truth just seemed impossible for anyone to believe. Now look, this background of trauma and abuse doesn't excuse his actions, not for a second. But it does give us some really critical context for the man he became. His father's constant abuse and his mother's enabling, it all created this toxic environment that totally warped his view of the world. Okay, now let's turn to the house itself. 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in a quiet Chicago suburb. We're going to see how this totally ordinary home was turned into a private killing field right under everybody's noses. And this right here, this tells you everything about his predatory pattern. His victims weren't just random strangers he snatched off the street. Nope, they were vulnerable boys and young men that he could easily approach through his contracting company. He was using his legitimate business as his own personal hunting ground, targeting kids he thought no one would miss. His method was just this chillingly consistent system of manipulation and pure control. He had this handcuff trick. He'd present it as a joke, a magic trick, and that was his key to overpowering his victims without a big struggle. And once they were restrained, he had absolute control. It was a predictable, brutal escalation. Assault, torture, and then murder by strangulation. So here's the crucial point. By 1978, after years of being so careful, Gacy started getting sloppy. The crawl space was literally full of bodies, so he had to change how he got rid of them. And that decision to start dumping victims in the river is what ultimately led investigators right back to his front door. So, with Robert Piest missing, and after a few initial interviews, investigators were convinced they were close to an answer. They moved fast and got a warrant to search Gacy's home. For days, though, the investigation just hit dead end after dead end. They did this massive 18-hour search and found some suspicious stuff, sure, but no bodies. Then, a week later, they came back with the county coroner, and he noticed something they had all missed: a smell. That unmistakable smell of decomposition, badly covered up with lime. In that moment, they knew. The truth wasn't on the surface. They had to start digging. The second they found that first body, Gacy's whole act just crumbled. He sat down with detectives and just started confessing, calmly drawing them a map of where all the other bodies were buried under his own house. The number he gave them, it was unbelievable. In a scene that just absolutely horrified the entire country, investigators painstakingly pulled 29 bodies from that crawl space and basement. And when you add the 4 victims he dumped in the river, the total came to a staggering 33. But you know, finding the bodies was really just the beginning of a long and painful chapter. The aftermath of this case, from the trial to the decades-long search to identify his victims, it continues to have this profound impact even today. The defense team argued he was insane. in some kind of dissociative state when he was killing. But the prosecution, they painted a picture of a meticulous, calculating predator, and the jury deliberated for only 2 hours before finding him guilty on all 33 counts of murder. He got 12 death sentences for the murders he committed after Illinois brought back the death penalty.
So after 14 years of appeals, Gacy's time on death row was finally up, and he was remorseless to the very last moment. No apology, no explanation, just defiance before he was executed by lethal injection.
But the story doesn't end there. For decades, 8 of his victims were just nameless. But thanks to incredible advances in forensic science and genetic genealogy, investigators have actually been able to give 4 of these young men their names back, finally bringing some kind of closure to their families after more than 40 years.
So why does this all matter? Well, because this case exposed some deep, deep flaws in how we handled missing persons in criminal investigations. Before the Robert Peace Law, police often had this 24 or 48-hour waiting period for missing teens, a loophole Gacy just exploited over and over. This case proved we needed immediate action. It was also one of the first big urban cases to prove how effective cadaver dogs were, making them standard practice. And the huge challenge of identifying so many unknown victims, that became a powerful argument for creating national DNA databases like CODIS, which just didn't exist back then.
And after all these years, after all this scientific progress and the tireless work of so many investigators, one young man, buried in the basement of that house on Summerdale, is still a John Doe. And that final, lingering question really highlights the enduring human cost of John Wayne Gacy's crimes. It's a reminder that behind all the headlines and all the horror, there are real families still waiting for an answer, and a quest for justice that is still going on to this very day.